So, I'm happy to introduce to you our speakers for today. This is Людмила Гребінь, who is Senior Research Fellow at the Council in Psychology and Psychotherapy at the Kostюка Institute. She is the Associate Professor of the All-Ukrainian Cognitive and Behavioral Psychology Institute. She's a supervisor and she leads the component section at the Ukrainian Union of Psychotherapists. Our second speaker for today is Mihal Lev, who is a certified art therapist, supervisor, certified family therapist, a professor at the art therapy program department at the Ono Academic College. She is the head of program expressive art therapy organization approval committee from Israel. Our third speaker for today is Elena Stupak. She's a registered psychotherapist specializing in psychodrama direction, lead of psychodrama section at the All Ukrainian Union of Psychotherapists, therapist in training, supervisor, and a member of organization Ukrainian Mental Health Specialist to Overcome Trauma. And we also have our fourth speaker, a nice surprise for the audience. This is Tatiana Nazarenko, who is trauma therapist, the head of public organization, Association of Ukrainian Mental Health Professionals to Overcome the Consequence of Trauma. She is a member of Scientific Deductive Commission at the EMDR Ukraine organization, a member of the board of Ukrainian Community on Traumatic State Research, representing Ukraine on the board. I'm happy to welcome our speakers. I'm sure that we will have very interesting discussion. And to start with, I would like to give floor to all our speakers so they briefly introduce their method, the specific feature of their method in dealing with trauma. So please tell us, how does your approach, how does your method suitable for unique needs of people affected by war? Maybe you can share some case examples from your practice, some examples from professional activities. And since we are most therapists here, of course, we are really curious to learn how expressive art, how to put it in the right way, how expressive art, how it is engaged, is used in the psychological support practice in the combat zones. And now, please, Ludmila, I'm giving floor to you. So, hello, thank you so much. So, cognitive and imaginative psychotherapy, catative imaginations. So, I mean, there's some imaginations which are used to express a person's deep conditions, deepest experiences. This is how, and this is the key idea behind this method. I mean, a person may go deep into their internal experience, touch their deep experience and express them outside using images, using drawing, using symbols. And the third point is that we technically can see these connections. Literally, right now I'm described what's done in the art therapy, but art therapy in CIT is considered a kind of, very basic foundations, because in a CIT we also use all the same techniques, but we just focus on imaginations. It's like a daydreaming. When a pair or a group of people see a dream together in the presence of a therapist. So there is some interaction, some dramatic situations or very resourceful situations. And this is how the drama works. This is how something happens like during a dream, because when we dream, we perceive everything we see as real. Our brain is unable to differentiate, is it a real event or is it a dream? When you have a dream of your loved ones, our heart pounds faster, we feel inspired. But if we dream of some dangerous situation, we wake up trembling. And so the KIP is using these natural resources of human psyche to feel. So katatism-imaginative therapy is a kind of time machine technique. We may travel to the past, travel to the future, and obviously, if we talk about working with trauma, when a person is more or less stable, a person is capable to travel to their past. But if a person is unstable, we may use some other technique, more kind of trauma therapy techniques, everything that you know, like a body-focused work, self-regulation work, and then the biggest part we use in dealing with trauma is rebuilding the connections to your resource. This resource may belong both to the past, it can be something which was existing before traumatic event, or something which exists here and now, because we know that trauma tends to break this continuity between future and past. So we need to rebuild this connection between past and future and re-establish connection with resources. It was just a brief introduction. Thank you so much, Ludmila, for introducing your method. I really like to use it myself. And now I will give floor to Ms. Tatiana, who will represent EMDR as a method of working with trauma. I hope you can hear me well. Yeah, hello everyone, hello dear colleagues. I'm really happy to see you all. You know, the psychology, as psychologists, we all say we learn continuously. So now I want to briefly introduce you my EMDR method. And so what's the purpose of this method? I will now tell you how we can use it. Now EMDR is a recommended evidence-based therapy recommended by all official organizations abroad, and here it's a first-line method for deal with PTSD. Another great advantage of that method is that it perfectly combines with other approaches, with other methods, with other psychotherapy directions, which either has or doesn't have its own personality theory. So the essence of this method is that we can use guided eyeball movement, because EMDR is translated as eyeball movement desensibilization and trauma processing. But it includes not only eyeballs movement, but also different bilateral tapping techniques. So what's the idea behind this method? There is a theory, we're all aware of it, of how we process trauma. That similar to daydreaming, we experience past trauma as real, as something going on here and now. When we experience intrusive thoughts or flashbacks, we don't realize that it's a memory. We don't have this critical judgment. We are unable to understand it. It's something which happens a long time ago in the past. This is the first thing. And the second point is that we all know that the self-esteem, negative beliefs after trauma, this is a big problem. A person's self-esteem may go lower. A person may experience feeling of guilt or shame, or unable to make decisions. We also know that trauma also lives in the body. And so what's the idea of EMDR approach? A therapist somehow triggers a client in order to make a person go deeper into that traumatic memory. We use eyeball movements to overload the brain. On the one hand, you have memories and other processes. And on the other hand, you have this bilateral stimulation and helps the brain to reset. And literally, after a while, after the sessions, we remember everything about traumatic event. We understand, we realize what happened. But this traumatic event doesn't cause such a strong emotional response any longer. People we work with, our clients who experience EMDR sessions, they share positive feedback. They say, okay, now it's a matter of the past. It doesn't belong to the present right now. It doesn't have such a strong influence on me. Now it's a part of the history. And it happens thanks to these biological, physiological processes, because we somehow destroy this connection between traumatic memory and strong emotional experiences in our brain. We can use EMDR as a very early intervention immediately after traumatic event. And quite often EMDR elements are used in stabilization practices. We all know this butterfly heart technique. It's very simple, or some other similar methods. It's all about bilateral stimulation, you see. We can also use EMDR approach at the crisis counseling stage for the sake of client stabilization, and of course for trauma processing when we talk about trauma therapy directly. So I strongly recommend to use this method to my colleagues. Of course, there are some limitations, some require some specific indications, but I think it would be really useful for everyone to learn more about this theory. Maybe, of course, you need a special training in order to efficiently use EMDR, but some stabilization techniques, some methods to ensure better understanding and conceptualization of cases can be used by all trauma therapists without exemption. Thank you so much, Tatiana. You haven't mentioned anything about combination with our therapy methods, or just briefly, just a few more words about that. Well, of course, we know that it's children, you see. We know that art therapy is a key way of interacting with children who have experienced trauma, children in trauma and in distress, and EMDR is a set of tools, it's approach, and so it can be perfectly combined with other approaches. And for children, we use some art therapy elements such as drawing or fairy tales or plasticine or movements, and it can be perfectly combined with EMDR. If we talk about adults, I also have an art therapy background, so I perfectly understand how these two work together. So when we talk about adult, we can also use some elements of EMDR, because EMDR even has group protocols where you have to draw your resource, draw your trauma, and then somehow work with these images to process your experiences using bilateral stimulation. And once again, you see, we all experience ongoing trauma of war, so I really recommend to everyone to use trauma-focused, trauma-informed approaches, whether EMDR or other approaches, but I think most our listeners already know it. Okay, thank you, Tatiana. Let me remind that on the very first day of our conference, we had a very interesting report in combination of flash techniques and creative activities. Yeah, I believe that right now the whole world experiences this trend, it's discussed at the international conferences, this mixed approach, a combination of several therapeutic approaches or directions is considered quite predominant trend in the industry. So we use whatever is efficient. yeah, whatever we have in our toolkit. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Tatiana. I'm sorry, I will have to interrupt you later to keep with our timing. Thank you, Tatiana. Now I'd like to pass the word to Ms. Olena. Please, I hope, please, could you please kindly tell us about psychodrama approach? Hello, everyone, dear colleagues. I'm really happy to be invited into this amazing circle of professionals today. So now let's talk about psychodrama. First of all, let me tell you briefly about the essence of this method and about toolkit. So how we can apply it in practice here and now, because I know that now we live in the times when we really have to understand what we are doing. I think you know that psychodrama is a method that where we try to represent the client's inner world in any format. As it is, on a stage, in a kind of space where we can be with the client here and now to share their fantasies, reflections, inner conflicts, in order to reframe this inner world and add some new expressive experiences to it and process this experiences that just happened on the stage. But when we talk about psychodrama, I think we have to understand and we need to remember that it's a bit wider method than we usually think about it. This method was born back in Austria in an IDP camp during the World War I. Back then, Jacob Moreno, a young physician, he was thinking a lot on how to address the various issues of people accommodated at this camp, people who experience despair, people who have lost their homes, people who had no idea how they would live on, people moved away from their families, from their homes. This is the same experience that we witness right now. And so, how to help these people unfreeze? And was the basic foundation of psychodrama theory. So when we talk about our today experience, how we're doing it, how we understand it, I think I would emphasize the group format, the group work. So what we are dealing with right now, we are dealing with a traumatic deprivation of basic needs such as safety, acceptance, attachment, future, vision of the future. So everything, every traumatic event present in a person's environment must be healed, it can be healed more by using social support networks. And therefore, group work is really helpful, especially since you know how to use it in a proper way. So I just want to, that at the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, everyone was confused, everyone was worried about their loved ones, about themselves, and we spontaneously came up with a lot of support groups. I just remember how Ukrainian Therapy Association immediately introduced the support groups in different formats for the community, and it was really important. I think every one of you has experienced it, and it definitely has a purpose and is a source of great resource. Actually, some of these groups they have been active for over 2 years. Now we in this way or different way we all work with groups. For example, my colleague from Zaporizhia, she lives in Zaporizhia and she works with local residents. Many of them have specific experience of losses, of shell fire, and very specific experience of living in the non-government controlled territory, or having family member in non-government controlled territory. And so group work is a way to support each other and survive each other during this time of great challenge. And so for this group work, this group work, they're like bubbles where you connect with people who have similar experiences. For example, we have groups for wives of military personnel, or for people who have experienced loss of family members. It's really good experience to run these groups, but we also have to realize some intercultural problems, intercultural conflicts. It's also important to manage and process them. So if we divide the groups where there are people with various experiences, they also can be quite productive, and it can be educated. These groups are supposed to have a common purpose. It can be therapeutic groups, support groups, psychoeducational groups. They're really helpful today as well. We have several types of work which called the social dramatic group. I will now briefly tell you about it, maybe a bit later if I have enough time, but just briefly, we use that group to process, to develop, to process the understanding, the idea of our diversity, to get aware of our stereotypes towards others. And it's also important healing and resourceful experiences. It's also important for us to rebuild the agency, the feeling of agency, and to focus on resource, which is helpful. No, usually we work with groups, but of course sometimes we also work one-to-one. And our toolkit we use is quite powerful in terms of expression power. So we have to also have some safety precautions when we deal with trauma. So the professionals, they are well aware of it, and we always emphasize it that when we deal with a traumatized part of a person, we have to be aware about potential risk of re-traumatization. So we need to use, for example, safe place technique, where the protagonist use some assistance, could use some support from assistants. Another useful technique is a dubbing, when we work to expand the understanding of a protagonist using the parts which have lost connections, for example, such as body experience, when we use empathic compassion to integrate the split parts. Another important techniques which works really well is a role exchange, but here we need to understand that the role exchange technique in our traumatic context, which requires mandates very careful use. For example, we cannot exchange roles with an aggressor, and we are not supposed to do it, and something we have to realize. Also, I will briefly tell you about what we do when we form group or when we meet people with special experience. For example, when a person has a major depression, psychotic condition, or suicidal ideation, we understand that we should be really, really careful to include these people into a group, and sometimes it's better to work one-to-one with this kind of clients. So we really want our professionals to understand what they're doing and what they're doing. So make it helpful and avoid causing more harm. And also, let me tell you briefly of how we use this general art therapy approach in our psychodrama methods. Our psychodrama can be combined literally with anything, because on stage we have almost limitless opportunities. We can use music, we can use dance, we can use body focused work, we can use fantasies, metaphors. This metaphoric approach is actually currently considered more safe because it gives person more feeling of control over what's going on. And of course, any fantasy stimulating materials and symbolization stimulating materials can be quite helpful. So metaphoric cards, dance and movement, all can be used in psychodrama and perfectly combines with this method. I saw among your colleagues, I saw Natalia, my colleague, and I just want to say hi because she once showed me this excellent example of how musical psychodrama can be helpful and powerful. Thank you so much. That's what I wanted to share right now, and I'll be happy to talk more if we have a chance, if we have a time. Yes, the discussions haven't yet started. We are just finishing our round of introductions, of method introduction, and now I pass the word to Ms. Mihal, who represents art therapy method, the predominant method on our conference. Yes, please, the floor is yours. And I once again kindly ask all our speakers to talk a bit slower. Because we are working with simultaneous translation, so please remember that you're being interpreted. Please, Ms. Mihal, could you please unmute yourself and briefly tell us about your art therapy approach and how this approach, in your opinion, is suitable for unique needs of people and affected by the war. Ms. Mihal, please. She represents. She also comes from a country in war, so I think she has a lot of unique information to share. Hey, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yes, I just want to let you know that this part of our panel discussion, this round of introductions is about to be over. We are about to continue with the discussion, and I think it's really interesting to hear Miss Mihal, and it really resonates with the experience in Ukraine. I'm not going to stop here, but I think every one of us has a similar story. Sandra for helping us to solve this technical challenge, and let's proceed with our discussion. First of all, so now let's talk about some cultural diversity, cultural specifics. And I will now kindly ask you to tell about how your method is informed of cultural diversity, cultural specifics, and does your approach require certain adaptation to cultural specific, not even trauma related, but in general, does your method require certain modification when used in different cultural contexts? Or does it require certain modifications, certain tools to make it appropriate for other cultures? And how your approach can be specifically adapted for dealing with trauma? Does it matter? Does it matter for efficiency of your method? So how this cultural adaptation is important for your method's efficiency? And no. I would first ask Ms. Tatiana to share her opinion about this cultural diversity and cultural adaptations. Now you have 3 minutes. I'm sorry, now I will be strictly checking the timing to give floor to the next speaker. Please, Ms. Tatiana. Okay, so let's once again, in order to answer this question, we need to look at the context of our work. Ms. Olena mentioned that in Dnipro they facilitate groups, and Dnipro, a city in the southern part of Ukraine, is now exposed to the very shell fire. The situation is very close to critical. Excuse me, Ms. Tatiana, you haven't chose the channel. Could you please select Ukrainian channel? Yes, just a second. Okay, I hope now it works. Is it better now? Yes, it's better. Okay, great. So in order to answer this question on regarding adaptation of a therapeutic method to modern context, we first need to define the context. So we need to understand what context they work with. Ms. Lena Stupak mentioned groups in Dnipro, a city exposed to really heavy shell fire. And I also know a lot of my colleagues who work in Kharkov and Kherson, other frontline cities who now serve in the military. And we know that the current situation is that we don't have much opportunities to, to organize everything, to deploy equipment, our materials, to put furniture, to build rooms. Since 2014, since the revolution of dignity, when we started to do counseling with people, many therapists were quite shocked that you have to do sessions not in a room, but in public setting, somewhere in a corner of crowded room, where people are walking back and forth around, so where you have no privacy you used to have. And now I think a lot of therapists are also facing the similar situation where you cannot arrange proper setting, usual setting, where you cannot equip your workplace in a way you would like. And so we just doing our best to we using what we have available, and we just being as flexible as possible. So in my opinion, it can, we need to lift some requirements to simplify the process a bit. I mean, we may use simpler tools, simpler materials, but available, simple but accessible, something we can immediately use as part of the work to avoid this very long preparation process. Because, for example, I know some art therapy techniques where you need a lot of materials, a lot of very specific materials, large sheets of paper of human height. Yeah, we will listen more to our art therapy, to Miss Mihal, our therapy colleagues who will talk about art therapy. Okay, so I will talk from perspective of my method. I think the techniques and tools should get simpler, should go simpler, and I think techniques and directives that require minimal costs, minimal materials, minimal equipments will become more and more popular. And what about cultural specifics, cultural features? Do we need to somehow adapt the methods to cultural context? Well, we always adapt our work to cultural context. Even when we do PFA, we know that the scope of what we can do and cannot do heavily depends on the culture. We always should be guided by the cultural diversity of the space in which we work. I think all methods require certain cultural modifications. I don't think it's a big problem in Ukraine. I have never saw any foreign methods or approaches which would be completely unsuitable to Ukrainian context. I think it really depends on the human interactions, on social, cultural, interpersonal interactions, to make sure that you keep distance, that you maintain borders, that you select proper language, and you are careful with your actions. Okay, thank you, Ms. Tatiana. And now I pass the word to Ms. Elena. Could you please tell us about your method, psychodrama, and doesn't take into account cultural context, doesn't require certain culturally appropriate modifications, and specific trauma-informed modifications. I hope you can hear me well. So, as a psychodrama specialist who's focused on social component, I would say that any group work, even it's not a therapy, even it's just a group work, it's always healing and productive. And actually, this idea behind the volunteer movement, behind new projects that emerge from this volunteer project, because when you are in a group of common-minded people, it's a natural way to cope with challenges, to be a part of a group. So it's really important to connect people with a common purpose when they can act together. So, in my opinion, this is a very natural way to overcome any cultural differences, if any. When I talk about cultural diversity right now, in Ukraine, it can be cultural diversity between various social groups. And here, let me say a few words about it. Our psychodrama group is a format where participants represent specific cultural and social groups, where their characters represent specific cultural and social groups. When we try to recreate these conditions where you can meet, what can be, so we're doing explorations. We explore which brings us apart, which connects us together, what is our common purpose. We have group rules to be on, and we have unbiased facilitators. So then we have a stage, we have limited stage space, and the stage, separates me from the rest of the stage. Action happens on the stage, and then we go away from the stage and do a reflection. This is how we can avoid, getting overexcited about this conflict. We have contained this conflict. Of course, we have special techniques. to manage emotions during the session. Then it's also important to manage social dynamic effects. In this kind of spontaneous group, the resource is always distributed unevenly. So we have to understand, so facilitator has to understand how to build this process, how to manage this process, and how to manage various effects, various emotions, how to make sure that each voice, even the quietest voice, is heard, that each member of the group can get support at least on one issue. And this is how we manage to get people together in the field. When once again role exchange with antagonists, let me stress it, not with aggressors, but with antagonists, means that within this very special exploration, social cultural exploration space, we can exchange our roles with the opposite position, with the opposite views of a specific situation. This is how we can expand our experience. Of course, it's quite emotionally challenging, especially for traumatic situations. And each of us has felt it when at the very beginning of the full-scale invasion, we found ourselves in the same cultural space with the aggressors. Even this particular person hasn't done anything bad to us. This person still represents other social groups, the aggressors. And this is the reason why we struggle to be in a safe place with them. And so the facilitator is not supposed to say, well, what's wrong with it? Let's build these bridges, let's build these connections to mutual understanding. No, it's not appropriate. We need to realize that this internal role exchange with the aggressor is impossible. We need some time in order to somehow become ready to do it. So we don't have to build these bridges where they're relevant. This is something I wanted to say. Thank you so much. It was really interesting. I totally agree. Role exchange with aggressor is impossible. Well, it's traumatizing and it's unneeded. Thank you. And now I would like to give floor to Ms. Mihal. Could you please maybe tell about how your art therapy techniques take into account cultural context and how you make your method trauma focused? So how do you take into account trauma and cultural specifics?
Sure. So again, let's talk about context in Israel. Cultural diversity in terms of religion, origin, ethnicity is actually the definition of life in Israel. It is a country with a very limited geographical, physical area, and a population with a fast pace of growth. Just to give you some numbers, of the 10 million residents living in Israel, about a third are Arabs, whether Muslims, Christians, other Arabs. About a third are religious Jewish from different sections. And this proportion exists everywhere. You know, when I teach, it's a graduate program for a second degree, master's degree. Students learning to become mental therapists. So within groups of 15 students, a third are Arabs, a third are religious Jewish, Orthodox religious with different sections in Israel, and a third are secular. These are the same proportions that remain. And so we're used to it from the moment that we are born. So from this point of view, the art and creative materials, creative processes, they enable communication that is not necessarily verbal, and it enables communication that bypasses cultural gaps. It brings people closer together. It invites intimate exposure when the materials, the artwork, the art processes, they function as mediators. Even when working with trauma victims, the work enables, the artistic work enables the safe distance from a stranger. When talking about the artwork, the art materials, to which the creator, the patient, the client projects private emotions and difficult feelings, the piece of art allows a regulated exposure that creates confidence. For example, when the reference of two people, the therapist and the patient, is to constructive challenges of the material, for example, how to build something out of clay, or how to use watercolors, how much water to use, technical things like that, they create unmediated communication. We're not talking about the problem of the person, but about the creation. And so we have something that both of us can focus on. Both of us are now talking about the art. We're not talking about what happened to you. We're not talking about the terrorist attack. We're not talking about your culture or my culture. We are currently two people only concerned with a certain color, a certain art material, a certain platform to which the art of work is situated upon. And so this helps to ameliorate and to befriend our cultural differences.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mihal. And I also remind all speakers that we have just 3 minutes for each speech. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Dmira. Okay, let me once again remind you that KIP is a well-designed techniques to work with deep emotions, using emotionations, using individual and contextual symbols. But all these techniques, they are based on certain models, human models, therapeutic models. And one of these models, which is really helpful to sort it out, to deal with all this chaos going on around, is a differentiation model, human ontology, like something common for everyone. And ontologically, if we are human, it doesn't matter if you Arab, if you are Israeli, or are you Ukrainian, we all have something in common, these very basic human features. Then the next layer is the forms of implementing your ontology. It's a cultural diversity. Indeed, every culture has certain usual forms of implementing their ontology. And then the third layer is a unique personality. So we have a form, we have shape, and we have unique personality. And this three-layer model is really helpful not to get confused when we work with different cultures. Some cultures are aggressive, like our neighbors, for example. Some cultures are just, normal, which can enrich our experience. And when we talk about adaptation, we assume that first of all, we should adapt our methods and we should adapt to our clients. If we talk about methods, the CIP method is developed by Germans. And it has been used in Ukraine for over 20 years. So now it's well adapted to Ukrainian context. And we know that his KIP is perfectly suitable for any culture. It's Europe, Asia, America. I assume that maybe there are some cultures where this method is inappropriate, but see, all people are dreaming. All people have dreams. And there are various usual cultural ways on how to deal with these dreams. Of course, we take into account. Then, but how to adapt to interaction with our clients? Who needs to adapt? Of course. We all may need some cultural adaptation because, of course, active hostilities is a totally different context. People who are IDP, who are displaced, of course, and I assume most of us have been displaced for at least a few months, even within Ukraine. And even in Ukraine, each region has certain cultural specifics. I think many of us have experienced it. And another point, another thing is military. A military person, he used to military culture. It's a very specific context. It's a culture of warriors. And now this person is injured, he's discharged from the army, and he's about to integrate back into civilian life. And he has to adapt to the civilian culture, and it's a very complicated task to facilitate this adaptation. Just so briefly, adaptation is not about dissolving in other culture. It's not about expanding and trying to change a person. Adaptation is about being yourself in the presence of others with mutual respect. And so, if we use this idea as a starting point, and we also use our three-layer model: ontology, form, and content, then the ontology, this very basic foundation, in our case, is a certain self-determination. If we have self-determination, we stick to our ontology. It's, and if this vertical model is maintained, if we are grounded in our self-determination, then if we go to other country and other region, we can enrich our form, we can enrich our shape. We accept something, we reject something, we share something ours. So we keep true to our identity, to our self-determination, and we keep true to our personality, to our unique personality, while these various cultural forms, cultural shapes can be enriched. And so, KIP is perfectly suitable for various topics and cultures because we don't have any settled interpretations of daydreaming. Person just talks about some symbols, some fantasies. Person is daydreaming about something, and we try to treat each daydreaming object as a symbol of my unique experience. And then we explore, we try to decipher this very personal symbol language to understand it and to continue to use it for the benefit of our clients. Thank you so much, Ms. Ludmila. I really don't want to interrupt you, but we have two more questions and we're already a little late on timing. I'm really sorry for everyone, but we have two important questions to talk about. I think this is something Ms. Mihal and Ms. Olena already mentioned, but let's talk about communities and let's talk about work with collective trauma. How you can adapt your method of work to work with communities, with larger communities, and to work with collective trauma. And how important the engagement of communities, of large social groups is for your work, how important this community engagement is for overcoming the consequences of war trauma. Ms. Olena, let's start with you. Let's start with you because I know that you mostly work with communities. Yes, I think here we have kind of social metric idea of what's going on in psychodrama group with social metrics is a way to measure relationships. Is it as a positive, as a negative? How does the structure look like? Is there any person who is isolated from the group? Does the group split into several subgroups? Do we have a group leadership? And so just here we talk about this group in a wide understanding of this word. Any community is a group. Any community is a group. And so when we talk about healing our wounds and building our resilience and responding to challenges, we have to understand that any community where there are displaced people, where military personnel return from the front line, and there are certain differences. Any this town or any this village may become a focus of our attention as community therapists, if we talk about communities. And so in this case, it's fair to say that any group would have leaders, outsiders, the cohesion index. And so here our approach may be helpful to heal the relationships, to improve these relationships. Of course, the group is interested in self-exploration. We cannot just go from outside and start working with community. So I mean, the community should be proactive in terms of helping themselves and helping others. Then we may identify the needs and use the most appropriate and most efficient tools to address the needs. By the way, here we see a lot of spontaneously emerging trauma, these communities which are spreading around. I even prepared a report on the trauma therapy conference. We have excellent examples. For example, this, I've improvised gatherings when fallen soldiers, the bodies of fallen soldiers are brought home. People who bring candles and toys to the sites of tragedy, of strikes with human casualties. And I mean, if we have access and we are willing to somehow help communities to develop their own rituals, we may rely on something pre-existing, explore the needs, and make our suggestions. And so here, expressive methods such as art therapy can be excellent to address it. We are building these rituals, and this is our way to overcome collective trauma. Thank you, Ms. Elena. And now, Ms. Mihal, maybe would you tell us a bit how you use art therapy with communities, with larger social groups? Do you have enough art therapy resources to work with community? Please, the floor is yours.
3 хвилини.
So yes, of course, adapting the way of working to large groups when it comes to creation and to art, it requires a little advanced information about the population with whom one is working. For example, in my work with the evacuated civilians in hotels in the Dead Sea, we created treatment areas according to the ages of the evacuees, first of all. So an area that looks more like a playground or a kindergarten for the young population, with materials and that will not endanger them, materials that are much more colorful, etc. A computer and video games, and creating sort of a club for the youth, places where they would be attracted to come into, otherwise they would just stay in their rooms, which is not ideal. You have to understand they had no school to go to. They were just being bored, hung around their parents, and then their parents could not have an availability to get treatment. So we organized some kind of clubs for them. And we utilized the lobby, the cultural rooms, or sometimes even the dining room areas for the older population who had difficulty moving from one place to another. So once we had these organized areas that were more or less custom-made for the certain population, we could have group work. We could have group therapy according to these different ages. We made sure that for each group we had people who were accustomed to using, to working in group settings, which is a bit different from therapy one-on-one or smaller groups like dyads or even families. So we held group therapy sessions. Sometimes we would create group artworks, like a very big mandala working on the floor, dividing a platform of a large wrapping paper, brown wrapping paper, dividing it into like sort of a pizza for each to receive their own triangle space. Or sometimes we would play around, exercises that are sometimes used for warm-up in sessions would be the entire treatment for this group, like repeating a movement, like repeating a name. Not all of these people knew one another. So we did facilitate working in groups because group work provides a lot of strength, resilience. Once you know someone in your group, you have sort of a friend, a new friend. For people who were left alone sometimes without their families, this was very, very important.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mihal. And now I would like to give floor to Ms. Ludmila, how your method can be used with larger social groups and communities, how appropriate it is for group work. Well, of course, there are group forms of KIP, both for adults and for children. So on the one hand, we have tools. We have tools to work with communities, and on the other hand, one of our tools, the key tools is the very understanding of what's going around. The KIP therapist has reflection tools, and they can influence both the focus of attention and the imagination. It has been practiced more or less spontaneously, just if people want to join, want somehow to influence the situation, there are methods to do so. It has been done. We practiced it in the shelters, in bomb shelters, in the vehicles, at the workplace teams. It's not like, please sit down, lay down, let's daydream about something. It's a slightly different adapted toolkit. And when you have these tools in your head, we can imagine any situation as a common dream, and we all have influence to change this daydream, to change the atmosphere in the community. I deeply respect the psychodrama method because the psychodrama element, but the level of imagination is also used in KIP. And I totally agree that you should not exchange roles with aggressors, and you should not exchange roles with someone who's really exhausted, who's really sick, who's really sick. It's just my comment on it. And if we talk about general understanding of groups, of course, KIP understands a community as a space which is definitely has influence on each particular member. And this influence can be healing and supportive, or it can be destructive and harming. It's like for example, if the community, for example, does not support a specific member. Once again, we use a structural regression model. And in this model, if a person has experienced traumatic events, the person is pushed into the structural regression and starts to function like a very young child. And we know that a young child needs social surrounding, needs people around, you know, parents, mother, father, they are there to hold that space. And so when a client or the whole community is regressing, if at least the therapist should be that one person who can hold that space. And then we can use various techniques to first stabilize, inhibit that regression, and then create conditions for resourcing and for making progress. In best case, the best case, we can achieve the post-traumatic growth. And if someone in the community, I mean, if, for example, we have a village, because and we have, or whether it's a village or just a Facebook online chat group, there is some spark of aggression. And then we need some pinpoint interventions to mitigate it, to create a different atmosphere and to make a difference. For example, there's a village in Chernihiv region which has been occupied. Also, almost part of the region was occupied, but this particular village wasn't under occupation, but people were really scared. They started to fight for resources, for bread. And so in this case, you can make some pinpoint interventions, say, people, hey, let's be grateful that we were not affected, and it was really helpful to change it. So, and if you treat any event like a daydream, you may use the corresponding tools. Thank you so much. And now I give word to Ms. Tatiana. How does your method work with communities in larger social groups? Well, I will talk from trauma-focused approach perspective. And when we have, like here, a lot of survivors in the country, we definitely need some actions, some interventions, which will be accessible for a large number of people. It's the first thing. And then my second point, my second idea is that we ask as trauma therapists, as art therapists, as psychotherapists in general, we have to do everything possible to help people recover themselves, to boost their own resilience. So our task is to stabilize person and launch, trigger this natural recovery mechanism, resilience mechanism. And so there are different group work protocols. So, and here's the first point, it's to use EMDR for stabilization, for installing resources, for installing a belief that you may actually recover all the trauma, to create the positive image of future. And it's easy to make it technically. You can do it online, you can do it in person. You just need a therapist competent with EMDR approach and a group of people interested in doing it. And if we do everything consistently, we start with stabilization and then proceed with trauma therapy. This sequence can be helpful in order to reduce the resistance against trauma therapy to trauma therapy and to reduce the stigmatization about seeking traumas help in general. Because nothing happens, we just talk about some nice stuff and how to recover, talk about how to recover. We talk about how we coped with trauma previously. We draw from our coping mechanism. We use bilateral stimulation to enhance these positive statements, positive self-statements. We enhance positive memories of how a person successfully coped with traumatic situation earlier, and this enhancement empowers the person to independently recover after strong stress, because let's be honest, we have only few trauma therapists, but there are a lot of people, affected people in Ukraine. And if we compare number of competent trauma therapists and the size of affected population, it's too few of us. Okay. Yes, everyone in Ukraine is affected. Everyone is affected. Therapists are also affected. They also engaged and involved in this event. So we have to do everything we can to, first of all, to take care, to do self-care. Okay, yeah, this is the most important task. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I really want to ask a last question, and you will have just really brief 1 minute to answer this last question, please, because it's a really important question. Is how to measure the impact, how to measure the efficiency of your method when we work with trauma during war, and is there a mechanism to adapt your method to the specific needs of the population? We already discussed this topic, but let's focus on measuring the efficiency, measuring the performance. And let's try to finish on time, because just 1 minute for everyone, because we're about to go to the live. I really want, because our offline audience really needs a lunch break. So how can you know that your method is efficient? Please, Ms. Mihal, let's start with you. Could you tell us briefly about measuring art therapy efficiency in dealing with trauma work?
Одна
I would
хвилина.
say that the first and immediate measurement or reassurance of the efficiency would be people joining the therapy sessions, because this is not immediate. Their instinct was to remain with their familiar people, with the group or the people that they arrived with, you know, getting to know, or even speaking, or even looking, directing an eye, creating an eye contact with a stranger during traumatic times is not obvious. It's a huge step. And so making a connection is the first and foremost an indication whether we're doing a good job or not. Then we could see people returning, coming back to the group session the day after. We could see them coming back to the areas where they could create and work with art therapists or volunteers, returning. That's another indication, because we're not talking about a developmental process that you can measure throughout time and a longitude period like in research. This is not the conditions, and this is not the situation that we've dealt with. We've dealt with people who are very closed up. They're scared for their lives. They have no reassurance. So any attempt to have a connection, to have a relationship that has a continuous you know, times, is a very positive indication. And if someone could return to the open studio that we've created, or to the area of creation, when they talk about their work, this is a huge progress, a very, very positive indication. So we have those, we have them. We have the people who were evacuated, becoming therapists themselves. You know, when they themselves worked with another family member or someone who is less, you know, feels more intimidated or did not show up, they bring them along. So we sort of use them as co-therapists. And that's also an indication that it's working. You know, they see the contribution on themselves and they're able to, they want to help others.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mihal. And now I give floor to Ms. Tatiana. How do you manage the efficiency of your methods amongst the work? Well, look, EMDR, as you know, is an evidence-based methods, and it's really well structured. We have really well structured before and after the assessment system. We use tests, depression, anxiety, inventory standard toolkits, which we normally use before, after traumatic events, self-esteem, depression, and anxiety, PTSD. We use these inventories before therapy and after the start of the therapy course. And it's really useful to develop scientific evidence base of the method itself, because we observe specific outcomes. We may share these outcomes with our colleagues. We may share these outcomes with charitable organizations or with people with other ordering or psychotherapy services. And another benefit of using these inventories and clinical interviews is that we can we show this result immediately to our clients. I know that many therapists know that people say, oh, we are so disappointed, it doesn't work for me. Well, just look at your test results. That's how much you scored at the really beginning. Yeah. Yes, and prior studies, and now people who also work in projects, they use tests, they use baseline inventories, midline inventories, and endline inventories to clearly see it, to clearly assess these outcomes. I actually suggest this outcome assessment to everyone, so both you and your clients can see this result. Okay, Miss Olena, you give floor to yours. You have 1 minute. How do you measure performance? I will be really brief. In psychodrama, we have a number of criteria, and the key criteria is regaining the agency. It's quite wide criterion, but it's really universal. What is the agency? It's the ability to build new connections, to face uncertainty, to adapt, to create new roles, to act your ability, to regain the ability to act independently and be responsible for their actions. If we see the agency increasing, it indicates that we are doing a good work. And this is actually the reason why it's so important for us to adapt to ongoing changes, because the toolkit we're using different kinds of toolkit online. Sometimes we have to work online, sometimes we have to use phone, but we always keep to our mindset. And even if the stage is imaginary, it's still a stage. And actually, this use of new approaches is the way how to we preserve, maintain, and develop our own agency and creativity. And so, but returning to the question, we also have a number of criteria. Thank you so much, Ms. Elena. It really resonates with what I'm doing in art therapy. Thank you so much. And now, Ms. Ludmila, please, how do you measure the performance of YouTube? Okay, thank you so much. First of all, since 2014, we already have done some more or less classic research with my colleagues, which proved the efficiency of our approach. Well, on the other hand, one, very, very quick sign of efficiency is this traumatic regression and progression dynamics. It's the ability to respect a person. When people regress, we lose the ability to respect. What's respect? We can differentiate our borders and borders of other people, and when a person is in traumatic regression, they lose this ability. And we see when they are not respected, or when we are respected, we feel it at the level of instinct. So it's a really quick sign we can use to assess performance. And actually, we also regress ourselves. So if we notice that we want to do something to our clients, it means that we are losing our ability to respect. It putting us in a position when we know what we have to do to person. It means that we need to do some self-care. So first of all, it's self-monitoring and monitoring your client in terms of their ability to respect and maintain borders. This is a very, very express assessment, way of doing this very brief assessment. Yes, so rebuilding personal borders. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. I'll be honest, I'm really honored to moderate this panel discussion. I'm really sorry that we don't have more time to offer floor to other participants who may work in other approaches, to say some, and because we all have a common purpose to rebuild mental health of our clients, as it was already mentioned, people affected by the war, all Ukrainians in general, all people in Israel. And just let me remind you that today we had, our panel had Ludmila Grebінь, KIP specialist supervisor, section leader head of KT's section of all Ukrainian Psychotherapist Union, Olena Stupak, psychotherapist and supervisor in psychodrama method, and leader of psychodrama section of all Ukrainian Psychotherapist Union, supervisor in training, Ms. Mihal Lev, a certified therapist, supervisor, family therapist, representative of art therapy community, expressive art therapist from Israel, and Ms. Tatiana Nazarenko, who represents EMDR approach, who is the lead of civil organization, Ukrainian Association of Mental Health Professionals to overcome traumatic consequences of traumatic events, and Ukrainian representative in European Traumatic Stress Research Society. I'm sincerely grateful to our speakers. It was my pleasure to moderate this panel, and I really hope that we will once continue our discussion in peer-reviewed journals at international conferences, because when we have this opportunity to share the experience, our experience, we enrich ourselves. Because I, as an art therapist, I learned a lot of valuable insights and practical insights. And I made some mental ticks for myself. You see, so I'm using a different name for it, but I'm actually doing the same. So thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for your work.